birthday on the 20th. Her birthday's on the 25th. And we're going to be together. Pretty hot, isn't she? So, Venmo, Cash App in the bio. I don't know why TikTok coins are taking forever to dish out. Prosecutors are not obligated to show their hand at the stage of the proceedings, and there are minimal requirements for what an indictment must say. Okay. Well, why don't the host post that video of Trump in 1987 to show the world how much he cares about us? What video? Is Barrister trying to join?
You want to bring another phone a friend up?
No.
Okay, good.
People are asking me to add them. Okay. So, how is everyone? It's a little quiet today. There's a lot of people watching. It's pretty good for a Sunday Live. I think it's so funny. Whenever I see lives... Oh, there you are.
I've been here the whole time. I've just been muted. Did you want to stay on this topic? Did you want to go to the third topic? What do we want to do here?
I mean, if you want to move on, I don't know what your argument is at this point, that it has to be attached to something else to make it a felony.
Yeah, so in order to upgrade them to felonies, there has to be another charge, like trying to conceal a crime or something like that. That's a felony. And again, he hasn't disclosed it yet because he's saying he's not required to disclose it at this juncture.
Yeah, he's legally not obligated to do that.
Right.
Which I don't really see a problem with. I think.
Right. Okay. I don't see a problem. Listen, what I'm saying, what my claim was, is that these are not standalone felonies on their own. They are actually misdemeanors. In order to upgrade them to felonies, you have to attach them to another felony. You said that wasn't the case, right? You said they were felonies on their own.
No, I asked you what would he have to attach it to.
Right.
I didn't say it's not the case.
Right. And then I just brought up the source information to show you that he doesn't have to disclose it at this juncture. I'm not saying he's doing anything wrong. However, he hasn't disclosed the felony that it's attached to yet.
Okay.
And again, this was the first case that was brought.
Upgraded it. Right.
Right. But we don't know what that original felony charge
the level
is.
Okay. We will.
Okay. Well, you said
but they'd have to be attached for it to be upgraded to felony in the first place.
That's what I said.
Him disclosing it is kind of irrelevant to the matter. All right. Well, what else would you like to talk about?
Did you want to talk about the party switch? Because that's the last topic that you came up with.
All right. You don't think it happened?
Nope.
Why are Democrats trying to take down the Confederate flag?
That's what you're going with? So are you talking about the rebel flag? Because the rebel flag and the Confederate flag are actually different.
Sure, the rebel flag. I understand that, but Confederate statues, to be more specific.
So is the South Democratic all of a sudden? I thought it was Republican.
The South was conservative and always has been.
Okay, so there wasn't a mass exodus of millions of Dixiecrats after the Civil Rights Act was passed?
There were, to the Republican Party.
No.
Are you familiar with the Southern strategy?
They left the region. No, they left the region.
Yeah, the mass exodus No, the Exodus wasn't
Yes.
about No, it wasn't a regional issue. It was about party
Okay, I'll pull up my
affiliation.
source. Hold
So
on, please.
when you say that they left the South, no, not geographically speaking. They absolutely did not go up to the North or what have you. Dixiecrats changed their political affiliation to Republican. I was actually looking through Arkansas the other day, the electoral map of Arkansas. And what's so interesting is, for one, I laughed out loud when I realized that Bill Clinton was once governor of the same state as Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But at that time, he was the only Democratic governor. There over up to that point, Democrats had been dominating Arkansas up till, believe it or not, 60s and 70s. And then up to the point where Bill Clinton became governor, he was the one. They won that state, and then Republican all the way. It's also notable that I think it was the chair or the vice chair of the RNC in 2015 had apologized for the strategy of the Southern strategy, which was appealing towards conservative members of the country, formerly Dixiecrats, and converting them over to the Republican Party. If there's an argument for how there isn't a party switch, one would have to explain why the same Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, 100 years later was calling for segregation now, segregation forever. That was Barry Goldwater, a Republican. It's awfully quiet today, isn't it?
So if you actually go and look at the Lyndon Johnson Library, it actually talks.
Is it George Wallace?
What?
What were you saying?
The
I
okay.
must have gotten the
So
quotes confused, although
the
Goldwater
L.
did run on an anti.
Oh no, actually, Goldwater didn't run on the anti. He was actually very pro civil rights. He just voted against the Civil
No, he
Rights
wasn't.
Act of 1964. Yes, he did. In 1964, he
He was
actually.
pro-segregation.
No, he wasn't. Not at all. Not even a little bit. As a matter of fact, if you look at the speech that he gave on the House floor when he voted against it, it'll tell you all you need to know. He actually voted pro
Right. He
civil rights
says
every other
he
time.
argued that discrimination against minorities was wrong, but measures to end it were also wrong and infringed upon the right of association.
Because of Title II and Title VII. Title II and Title VII had already been ruled on by the Supreme Court, so he deemed it to be unconstitutional. He didn't want Title II and Title VII in there because it infringed on other people's civil liberties. So he always was
So he
pro civil
wasn't
rights.
for pro-civil rights. How can you
He
say that he
was
was
pro civil
pro-civil rights, but
rights.
he didn't vote for it, by the way? Voting records suggest that he did not vote for it.
He
But
voted for it in
to say that,
1957
to say
and
he
in
supported in
1960.
theory, he
No, he
supported
voted
in
for the Civil
theory,
Rights Act of
but
1957 and 1960. The only reason why he voted against it in 1964 was due to Title II and Title VII, and he explained that perfectly clear. However, if we look at
and that's fine.
history, yeah, because because the Supreme Court deemed it unconstitutional, which meant in order for him to vote for this, he would have had to go against the Constitution, and because he was a constitutionalist, he was not going to do that. However, he desegregated his own family business in the 1930s, long before segregation was.
How is that? What ruled that
desegregation was even a thing.
unconstitutional? The civil rights movement. I mean,
Okay,
what
so
ruled the civil
Title
rights
II
movement
and Title
unconstitutional according to
VII,
them?
forcing people
Right.
to.
Of?
Okay, so Title II and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1954 or 1964 basically stated that people were then going to be forced to, allow, any sort of businesses. They couldn't return. They couldn't turn services away. They couldn't not sell to somebody or whatever the case is, and that's a violation of somebody's civil liberties, and has since been overturned.
It's not on the basis of protected class, which the Civil Rights Movement, which the Civil Rights Act had established. that your race is a protected class not to be discriminated against. Why he would argue otherwise, or that it sets a legal downturn for him, is a problem. That he would see that as a rights violation, that he could not discriminate against black people, or that other people could not, I think is problematic.
Well, you can think it's problematic all you want, but the Constitution is what he was concerned about. He was concerned about upholding the Supreme Court's ruling that had to do with the Constitution, upholding the Constitution. You can't force people to do anything. If you have to force people,
it's not forcing them to do anything.
For other
it's forcing them not to do something.
Your rights.
It is forcing them not to discriminate. You don't have the right to discriminate.
Not saying you have the right to discriminate. You shouldn't discriminate against somebody, but you can't force people into something either, because that's a violation of their constitutional rights. And since then, the Supreme Court agreed with Barry Goldwater, because they also overturned that. You could refuse service to anyone for any reason.
Not on the basis of protected class. That's what the Civil Rights Act has implemented.
But then you would have to prove that it was based off of protected class. But again, that muddies the water.
It's a protected class.
There was the Supreme
Court. The whole
Court
argument was on the subject of their race and discrimination
Barry Goldwater
thereof.
Was very pro civil rights. He was very pro.
Very pro is not accurate.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Would you give me the big screen, because I have his speech pulled up if you'd like?
What does he say?
Are you going to give me the big screen?
Just tell me what he says.
So again, what he says is that he has always been pro-civil rights. He voted for civil rights in 1957 and in 1960, even though the Democrats tried to filibuster it in the longest filibuster in history. However, he could not in good conscience vote for this Civil Rights Act because of Title II and Title VII, because it goes against and infringes on other people's constitutional rights, and he wasn't going to go against the Constitution. And obviously he was right, because there was a Supreme Court ruling prior upholding what he was saying, and the Supreme Court came in afterwards and upheld what he was saying.
All right. What ruling are you referencing?
It was in 1883. Hold on, let me go look.
I think I know what you're going to talk about. Getting pretty hungry. I haven't had breakfast today.
109 U.S.C. 3, U.S. 3, 1883.
USC 3, 1883?
No, U.S. 3, 1883. There was actually 5 cases. They consolidated them into one. But if you look at the trend, Roosevelt, the reason why people voted for Roosevelt, even though he was a Democrat, was because they were voting for the person and his policies, not necessarily because he was a Democrat. Dwight Eisenhower followed that, and he actually overwhelmingly had the black population voting for him, as he won both the popular vote and the electoral college. And then John F. Kennedy, that's where things started to shift, because John F. Kennedy ran underneath the Democratic ticket. The reason why he ran under the Democratic ticket is because that's what his dad wanted him to run under, even though he was abhorrently opposed to his father's political views, as could be cited when his father was the ambassador underneath another president, a U.S. president, and he actually was against the United States joining World War II when John F. Kennedy was actually pro. So when John F. Kennedy was a senator and he ran for his presidential bid, Martin Luther King was actually in jail at the time. And
All right,
John
look,
F. Kennedy
this is going on. This is going on a tangent. This is going on a tangent. All right. So look,
a tangent. I'm laying out the history.
Right, but okay. But one at a time. One point at a time. You're talking about a civil rights decision of the 1880s. Okay. Overall, had been overruled towards the point of the Civil Rights Act nearly 100 years later. That found that to be unconstitutional. And I would think that judges of the 1880s were not all that enamored towards the idea of racial equality in America towards African Americans as they were 100 years later. Now, to say that racist conservative judges set the precedent that one should be allowed to discriminate and that it's unconstitutional to do away with discriminatory practices is antithetical to the fact that we know that it is unconstitutional to discriminate because that denies them the right towards transport,
But the Supreme Court overturned that after Barry Goldwater voted on the Civil Rights Act, right? But prior to
why are you referencing it?
Because beforehand it was the Supreme Court ruling in 1883. So at that point, you'd be asking somebody who values the Constitution above all else to go against the Constitution in order to vote for this act, and he was not going to do it. However, he was always very pro-civil rights.
Does that make it not problematic? Does that make that stance not anti-civil rights?
No, he was very pro-civil rights. He just didn't agree with Title II and Title VII. That was
okay. One cannot argue 2 points at the same time.
Ruled on it because the Supreme Court has
already ruled on it. The Supreme Court of the 1880s,
now, okay, it doesn't
of Reconstructionist era. It does. The history of that matters. Okay, because that was a point just after slavery had ended, and they were still deciding whether or not African Americans were afforded equal rights under the law. They decided at that point that they weren't. That's a problem.
Okay, so again, you would be asking him to go against the Constitution to vote for
just because the Constitution decided it was okay to discriminate.
Can I finish? In 1957,
that's a bad point.
In 1957,
no, stop. It's a bad point to say that because the Constitution or the judges decided it was constitutional to discriminate doesn't mean discrimination is okay or lawful or should be deemed
it meant
permissible under the law.
People had the right to determine whether or not they wanted to interact or sell goods, buy goods, whatever the case was.
Okay.
You can't infringe on somebody else's rights. Okay.
If the Supreme Court decided today that no one could own guns, would that be okay?
Hold on a second. So having said that,
answer that, please.
Can I finish and then I will answer your question?
This is my life.
Can I finish my point and then I will answer your question?
You may not. You may not. You will answer my question first and then finish your point. If the Supreme Court ruled that this is my life, if the Supreme Court ruled that no one can own guns and that was then the precedent set, would that make it okay?
They would never do that because they can't touch the original 10.
They could.
No, they can't.
They could. They could deem certain guns. They could deem certain guns unlawful for you to possess. They could ban the distribution of them or manufacturing of certain weapons.
Okay, great. I answered your question. So can I finish my point now?
No, you didn't. You just said they couldn't. They can.
Yeah, I
answered your question.
I answered your question. So can I get back to finishing my point?
Overrule that.
Can I get back to finishing? Can I get back to finishing my point now before you pivot?
They deemed slavery was lawful, and then they didn't. Right?
Okay. So again, can I finish? Can I wait, since I answered your question before you pivot and move the goalpost, please?
That wasn't how did I move the goalpost?
Because you went to the Second Amendment.
Okay. If they did away with the voting rights of women, that's not one of the original 10 and said that we repeal the 19th Amendment. I know. They decide that we can repeal the 19th Amendment, that it's no longer lawful for women to vote.
Because
is that then the precedent that one should abide by? Is it then permissible for the law to discriminate the right of women to vote?
Okay, so the 19th Amendment is not in the original 10. The original 10 are
I know, that's why I brought it up. That's why I brought it up.
So I don't care about anything that's not in the original 10.
The 13th and 14th and 15th aren't either.
Okay.
And what that 1883 ruling ruled was that it was not lawful for them to do away with discriminatory politics.
Okay, so again,
Are you not tracking?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely tracking. But my point is, I don't really care about any other amendment that was made past the 10th Amendment. The reason
It
being,
referenced the 13th and
can I
14th and
finish?
15th Amendment.
Can I
You
finish?
do, though. You do, because
No, I don't.
1883 109 U.S. 3 references the 14th Amendment.
Okay, so I was talking about the Second Amendment. See, this is why I don't like when you move
Oh
the
my God,
goalposts.
track the conversation, track
No,
it, okay?
well, can you not pivot?
Track it.
I
Please
could
track it. I'm
if you
not
don't
pivoting.
pivot
I'm
it.
not pivoting because
Yeah,
you said
you
that the
literally
original
are.
10 don't
I
matter.
don't
You said the
care.
original 10 don't matter. So we're referencing
No,
the
the
13th
original
and
10
14th
do
Amendment.
matter.
Okay. You said that they cannot touch those.
They cannot.
So they're okay, track it. 103 U.S. 3 is referencing the 13th and 14th Amendment. I'm saying if
Right.
conservatives referenced the 19th Amendment and said that that was no longer constitutional, would it be okay for the Supreme Court to rule that women no longer have the right to vote?
Sure. Because it's not in the Bill of Rights. It's not in the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights are the ones that.
Shut up. No. You are a citizen of America, be you a man or a woman, and you ought to be guaranteed the right to vote, regardless of the basis of sex, race, ability, or what have you. And to argue that that is a constitutional thing to do just because a Supreme Court decides on it doesn't make it any less wrong or problematic. It's not covered under the Bill of Rights. That's why I referenced the 19th Amendment. The right to vote for women was not covered in the original 10. Anyways, that was 2.5 hours. I think we've covered enough. People are people. The Supreme Court could rule that they aren't people. I'll let you back in if you want. But I needed a moment of silence to process that. They can. They can deem the 13th Amendment no longer constitutional. Okay. If they can overturn the 19th, why can't they do the same with the 13th?
I didn't say they couldn't. They can't touch the original 10. Those are your Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights cover all people.
I reference everything that I've referenced has been the 13th forward.
I understand that. But no,
you're saying that they could
you referenced
touch those,
the
right?
Second Amendment. You referenced
and then,
the Second
all right,
Amendment.
and I corrected myself because
right.
you said
and
that we cannot touch
that's
those.
What I was touching
and I gave
on.
you right,
that's
and
I
said that the decision 109 U.S. 3 ruled on the 13th and 14th and said
Correct.
that no, we can't apply civil rights equally towards African Americans. So because I used that analogy and applied it towards the 19th, that they could overrule that decision and say, hey, we can revoke the right for women to vote. And I'm asking you if that is just, if that's constitutional, just because the Supreme Court decides on it.
Okay.
My answer is no. Yours is that it is.
No, because the 13th, 14th, and the 19th are all covered in the original 10. We are all people. Yes, we are all people.
Count.
We 13, are all 14. People.
How were they covered in the original 10?
They were
That's
unnecessary.
Not the Bill of Rights.
They were unnecessary because everybody in the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments were already covered in the original 10.
Black people were not.
Okay, so if you read the original 10 Bill of Rights, so all men are created equal, right? What was the biblical term for humans in the Bible?
At the time. They did not apply that towards black people.
They didn't
Hence why we had to amend it.
They should have. But if you read it
they
today...
They didn't, though, which is why we had to amend it, which is why they were viewed as 3/5 of a human being for the purpose of population counting. We had to amend it so that they were considered men equally covered under the law.
But it was
to begin with.
I understand that, but it's unnecessary because everybody is covered under the original 10.
At the time that it was written, they weren't.
I understand at the time it was written. However, if you're asking me in 2023 if we could do away with the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments, I would say sure, because we're all covered under the original 10. Are we not?
Now we are because of amendments.
No. Okay, so
Look,
at the
if we
time,
had no
at the
amendments,
time, did we need those amendments?
if we had,
because people
if we
wanted
had
to
no
clarify.
amendments, if we had no amendments after the original 10, do you think that those same exact laws would be applicable towards everyone, regardless of race, religion, class, sex, ability?
So again, they are unnecessary amendments because they were all covered in the original 10. So if you did away with the 19th, 13th,
I'm asking,
and 14th
would they be applicable? Why aren't you answering that? I'm asking, would they be applicable?
I'm answering it. At the time, no, they were not applicable. But in 2023, right, which is where we're at now, if they did away with the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments, it wouldn't matter because everybody's covered underneath the original 10.
The original 10 did not cover them. So how would we account for everyone if the original intent and specifications weren't to do that?
Okay, are we the people of the United States of America? Are you
tracking the conversation, Lynn?
Yes, I'm tracking the conversation. Are you?
The original 10 did not consider me a person.
And the original 10.
How would they correct that unless they amended the language?
You were covered under the 13th and 14th. Okay. I wasn't covered till the 19th, right? So having said that, in 2023, if you did away with
Black women had it even worse.
In 2023, if you did away with the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments, it wouldn't matter because we're all people that
now
were born
because of
in
that,
the United States.
Because of the ones that followed, because of that.
No,
that was fucking established in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Okay, so the
Citizenship was established under those amendments after post hoc the original 10. No, you don't. Because how would it apply to a modern context unless we amended it towards people of different races, classes, sexes, and ability?
Okay, so again, in 2023, if you did away with the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments, our lives would not change a lick. They would be the same because we're all covered under the original 10. We're not talking about 1883 or 1905. We would all be covered under the original 10.
What the fuck do you mean our lives wouldn't change without the ability to ban discrimination? That would then permit people to discriminate. That would then permit election officials towards barring people on the basis of race. That would ultimately give them the authority to decide who is or isn't a citizen, regardless of if they were born here. A court could just rule that someone isn't a citizen all of a sudden because they're black.
Okay, so can you tell me in the original 10 where race is ever brought up?
It doesn't need to.
Or gender.
Because in the context at which it was brought up, they were not viewed as equal citizens.
Okay, it doesn't matter. We're not in 1789 when the Constitution was written. We are in 2023. So in 2023, even if you got rid of the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments, okay, we'd still be people, we'd still be United States citizens, and we'd still have all the rights covered underneath the original 10, correct?
How will we be citizens without the ones that followed that?
Are you still going to be a person of the United States of America?
Would I be legally considered a person of the United States?
Are you in
this land? I am in this land. Would the government recognize my identity as a citizen?
Sure, they would.
Even if I was born? No. Then why didn't they do that with slaves? Why didn't they do that with slaves?
Because
are you saying that if they had no 13th Amendment,
at the time the Constitution was written, slavery was legal?
Okay, are you saying? I know. Are you saying that if we just kept the original 10, please just let me finish. Please just stop interrupting. If we just had not done anything in the Reconstruction era and post-Civil War era and added any amendments towards voting rights, towards civil rights, towards citizenship, it would just naturally apply?
So are we in 1863?
Can you just answer that?
Or 1883?
We're doing a time travel experiment, okay? If we go back then and did not touch the Constitution, did not add protections, legal protections for African Americans, would the law just simply apply to them naturally?
No.
That's my fucking point.
Okay, so in 2023,
the point.
Magic
word. That was my point. It wouldn't naturally apply. Hence, amendments.
No,
it
if
wouldn't.
you went back, hold on a second. If you went back to 1863, sure, we needed them at the time because of what had gone on prior to. However, if we didn't do those amendments, okay, and there wasn't an issue and everybody was like, oh, okay, well, we'll just go based off the Constitution, then it would apply to everybody. Just like in 2023, we know the original 10 applies to everybody.
You just said
you don't need the government's permission to be a person.
You just said that they wouldn't naturally transfer over.
That's not what are we bringing up somebody else? Good grief.
Oh, goodness. If he connects.
Can you add, what is a 1v1?
We've been having one, haven't we?
Isn't a 1 versus 1 you and one other person?
Yeah, you're talking to him now.
Lynn.
You were talking to him.
Lynn, can you focus? What of the original 10, which amendment covers voting rights?
None of them.
Okay, so we could eliminate the other 17, and we could reinstitute poll taxes. Is that correct?
No.
Why?
You're talking about the commerce.
That's what one of the.
Okay, so again.
No, I'm talking about the amendment that. There's an amendment that bans poll taxes. Which one is it?
Okay, so again, if we're talking about the original one,
no, sweet, no. Okay, so what
Jaden,
amendment in the original 10 prevents us from having poll taxes?
Okay, so again, Jaden, right?
Yeah.
I'm not debating you because you didn't ask me to debate. This is a 1v1.
All right. I'll take him down. I'll drop him down. All right. Thanks for coming up, Brian. What amendment in the original 10 covers voting rights?
None of them do.
Then how would there be basic protections?
Because we're all people.
How would that be codified? How do we codify that into law then?
Because
if it's just expressed?
The Constitution was written by the people to give them protections from the government. So
right, and without amendments, we can determine that someone isn't a citizen.
No, so the only people that are not citizens here, the only people that are not citizens here are people that are born outside of the United States. And unless they apply for citizenship,
and you know what amendment
then they don't get it. But they
naturalized
still get,
citizenship?
Even if they're not citizens, they're still protected under the Constitution. You understand that, right?
They wouldn't be.
They still get.
You already said that it wouldn't transfer over.
They still get huge. Okay, so
then how are voting rights protected without that?
Okay. Oh my God. Okay, so again, the Constitution protects people even if they're not citizens that are here.
We're talking about citizenship. How would they establish the process of citizenship without those other additional amendments?
They have to apply.
How do they do that? How do they do that without the additional amendments?
Apply for citizenship.
You know how that application came about? With additional amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th.
Okay, so again, what you're saying with the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments is that determined who were considered citizens and people, right? So they would have to be born or naturalized, right?
Yes, the 14th Amendment is crucial towards determining that. Without a 14th Amendment, how do we establish that? Because it wasn't covered in the first 10.
Great. So in 2023, right? If you got rid of the 13th, 14th, and 19th amendments, do you think that automatically means that you're not covered underneath the original 10? Even though people that were not born here, that are immigrants that come over here are still protected underneath that same document?
Yes. And you want to know how? Because without the 14th Amendment, Ted Cruz would be considered a Canadian.
So again, you can apply for citizenship.
How do you
right?
apply for that without the 14th Amendment?
You can. The 14th Amendment doesn't give you a process to apply for citizenship. It says born or naturalized. And back in those
Right.
days, when the
He's a
13th
naturalized
and 14th
citizen.
Amendments, hold on a second. When the 13th and 14th Amendments were written, how did one become naturalized? They just got here. That's it. There wasn't really a process. They were here. They came here and they
Right.
intended to stay. Correct?
Right, because we didn't have other territories at that point for that to be applicable.
Okay. So again, they were still covered. Correct?
No.
Yes, they were. They were still covered. They would still be covered now because you still get constitutional rights even if you're not a citizen. You still get the right to due process, right? Do you not? Even though you're not a citizen, do you get the right to due process?
I'm not arguing that you don't.
Okay, great. Well,
But
yeah,
how
you
are those
kinda were.
rights?
You
How are
said
those
that they
rights
wouldn't
instilled
get-
within the original 10? They aren't.
Again, if you read the original 10 amendments, those are the only ones that you really need because
Then why do we have the others?
People are covered.
Then why do we have the others?
Okay, the reason why we have the others is because the government is doing that to regulate us more and more and more and tell us that they're giving us permission to do things, but we don't because we already have the permissions underneath the Constitution, which was protected long ago.
So banning chattel slavery is a rights infringement.
What?
Banning
Who said
chattel
that?
slavery is a rights infringement. Would it be a rights infringement?
No.
Is the 13th Amendment a rights infringement?
No.
Why not?
Why would it be?
Because the government is stepping in on my right to own other people.
Okay, so again, once they ended slavery, they abolished slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation, right?
And then gave what kind of
So
protection
slavery
to
was
make
no
sure?
longer a
Wait,
thing. So the
gave
13th
what
and
kind of
14th
protection?
Amendment is not what
kind of
stopped
amendment?
people from being property. It was the
What kind of-
Emancipation
yeah, it did.
Proclamation.
Codified into law, into the Constitution through what? That's a proclamation. That's not an amendment.
So again, the Emancipation Proclamation ended
That's
and
not-
abolished slavery, did it not?
It did, but there was also
Okay.
serious concern and question as to whether or not it was constitutional. Today, we might argue that it probably wasn't. Still,
Well,
we did it
so-
and codified it into law through the 13th Amendment.
Okay, so the way that was taken care of is there was actually reparations that were paid, right? Because
no, they weren't.
the government did away with people's property, right? So then they were compensated. So they still stuck with the Constitution. Abraham Lincoln
They
did.
compensated white people.
No, they compensated slave owners. That not
That's
all
what I
slave
just
owners were
said.
white. Not all slave owners were white, bro.
You can't argue that a majority of them, or at least even half of them, or at least 2% of them were black.
You just made the
Or to say that
you just made the
or to
comment
say that that's
white
or to
slave
say that
owners-
that's
and
fair
I'm saying
reparations.
that there were more than just
Right,
white
they
slave
paid
owners.
out slave.
It was
I know
slave
that there
owners
are,
in general.
but who
It was
was the
slave owners in
majority?
general.
That's not saying
owners-
reparations were paid out towards slaves. That's slave owners. A small
No,
amount
it
of
was
them
paid
were
out towards
black.
slave owners.
100% of slaves were black.
There were over
So only
3,000 slave owners
Why would you even?
that were black.
Why would you say that? Why would you justify? How many of them are white?
I'm not
But why would you
justifying
justify
anything. I'm literally
You
not
are.
justifying anything. No, I'm not.
reparations for
literally
slave
just
owners is
said
a bad
it was
idea?
unconstitutional for the government to make a law, right? That deprived people of property. So that is why they were paid out by the government and they made the Emancipation Proclamation. So therefore it was constitutional to do that because they did compensate them, right? And
Are you
then
hearing
it
yourself?
was done.
Are you hearing yourself? Do you think that's justified?
What are you talking about? Based off of
You've
the
acknowledged that they were
Constitution at
viewed
the
as
time,
people.
The government cannot intervene and take your life, liberty, or property
Okay.
without due process.
Adding-
Because the
Oh my
government
God.
did that, they
Lynn.
compensated people.
Lynn.
So therefore, it was constitutional once they were compensated. So no.
Lynn, giving them reparations for lost property would in effect continue the narrative that black people are property. They shouldn't have paid them. Why would they pay them if they were human? They're not property. They don't have the right to reparations, nor is reparations for slave owners a good idea. That only furthers the idea that they were never human all along if we're giving them reparations for it. It's a terrible idea. If you want to argue any further about a party switch, one of us here is saying that the 13th Amendment is necessary. The other is not. Funny how the Republican Party that established the 13th Amendment is now arguing that it's no longer necessary. If you want to talk party switch. She knows where the button is. I'm not letting anybody else in.
I'm happy to talk about the party switch if you don't want to talk about the Constitution, because you're the one that brought the Constitution into this.
That's irrelevant. No, you brought it up with that 1883 law saying that it was unconstitutional for people to...
No.
Excuse me, I'm still talking. I know. And I was asking whether or not that's a good precedent to set, because then the Supreme Court could decide that the right to vote was no longer a good idea. It could then decide that the 13th Amendment wasn't a good idea, right?
Okay,
Would it be constitutional for them to do away with the 13th?
Okay, so again, the point was you asked me for the Supreme Court case that Barry Goldwater was referencing when it came to Title II and Title VII being unconstitutional. I gave that to you, then you pivoted and asked me about the Second Amendment.
I know.
So now
and
we
so
got
the
on
question
the Constitution.
was right,
so
and I corrected myself.
Or do you want to
I corrected myself. Yeah, we're talking about the party switch here, and I corrected myself and gave you the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments. Okay, and asked whether or not that would be constitutionally sound if we overturn that or deem those null and void.
And it would, because the Bill of Rights still apply.
No, it would not. Because at the time of its inception, it didn't guarantee those rights towards all people.
It doesn't matter at the time of its inception.
It didn't guarantee the right to voting.
It doesn't matter.
It does not guarantee the right to vote.
2023.
Then how do we establish that?
2023 now.
Lynn, how do we establish that black people have the right to vote if not for the 14th and 15th Amendments?
Can you give me the amendment where anybody, right? Just say a white man has the right to vote. Can you give me that amendment?
That was already pre-established. It didn't need to be.
Where was it pre-established? Where was it pre-established in law?
I'm telling you, it did not need to be.
Right. And guess what? Based off of
at the time of its inception, because it was written by said white men who were only allowed to vote.
Awesome. So based off the original 10, okay, even if you got rid of the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments, we are all considered people. We're all covered under the Bill of Rights. So we would all have
as established by the people who wrote it. Lynn, as established by the people who wrote it. As established by the people who wrote it, who did not believe that that applied towards women and black people. Okay, we can't just assume that that would naturally transfer over to them unless we amended that to say specifically that it does.
So do you know that prior to the Constitution, black people and women could vote in certain areas? Like New Jersey, for example?
Certain areas doesn't mean that it's no less unconstitutional for them to bar them elsewhere.
Because it was based off of states. Each state, based off of the 10th Amendment, each state got to govern how they saw fit to govern their people.
Okay,
right?
so then states can say that slavery is okay then, right?
Okay, so why was the Constitution written, Jaden? Do you know why?
To establish a basic set of principles and rights guaranteed by the country.
Wrong.
You tell me.
Okay, so in 1783, when we signed the Treaty of Paris and we negotiated our independence from Great Britain from 1783 to 1789, no such law was established. In 1789, they came up with the Constitution to unify all of the states so that they were no longer independent and they went underneath one banner. In order to do that,
under a central document.
Right. in order
that
to do
guaranteed
that.
rights and liberties no matter, without regard towards where you lived.
So
That's
what
no different from what I just said.
no, because that is not that the whole
Yes,
purpose
as
of
being
the
a universal basic set of principles applicable towards the United States.
No. Okay. So again, it was to unify all of the separate states. So we're all operating independently.
Under a
Hold on
list of
second.
rights.
Can I finish? Can I
That
finish?
could not be infringed.
Can
What?
I finish?
It was
Can
to
I
protect
finish?
a certain. No, it was to protect a
You
certain number
interrupted
of
me.
rights
Can
that were
I finish
guaranteed.
my okay,
I'm
so
allowed to
again-
interrupt you
Oh my
here.
God.
You've
No,
interrupted
you're
me
not.
constantly.
How is this a good faith debate if you're going to sit here and be a dictator?
How is this a good faith debate if you're defending slavery?
I'm not defending slavery. How are you?
You're
my
saying
God.
that it's
This is why
okay
I
for the
hate-
13th
this is why I
Amendment to
hate
be repealed.
debating leftists, because you're getting upset and not sticking to the topic, and now you're bringing feelings in, and now you're trying to say I'm doing something I didn't do. So again, in 1789, when the Constitution was written, it was written to unify the separate states underneath one banner to make it look stronger to other countries. So in order to do that, they had to compromise to get all the states to agree. So they weren't going to say to 13 states, oh, and by the way, you're not allowed to do this, this, or this, because the states never would have agreed to do it. So
Literally
therefore,
what I just
they
said.
had to allow they had to allow each state to govern their people as they see fit. The Bill of Rights was written not just to unify the separate states, but also to give people protections from the government, including
How is that
the states.
different from what I just said?
But including the state, because
I know.
it's not.
It
That's not
sets
the only
limits on what the
reason.
government can do and what people are allowed to do based on a centralized document that is not discriminatory based on where you may live in the country. So one right here is covered by the Constitution, the federal government, as it would be in another place.
Okay, so again, the whole purpose of the Constitution being written was to unite the separate states underneath one banner to make them look stronger
Is what I said.
to other countries.
Right, and
You
guarantee
said
a
just to give
universal
people
system of rights.
rights
That's
under
not what I
one
said.
government.
That was not
That's
what I
what
said.
you
I
didn't
said
say anything about foreign
I
entities. You
described
didn't
it
say
as
anything
a.
about
Oh my
unifying the
God! I
separate
described
states.
it. I didn't have to, because my answer would still be correct as a unifying document that gave a basic set of principles and protections under the law.
That is a partial answer, but that was not really the
Is it a
main
wrong
reason
answer?
behind the Constitution.
Is it a wrong answer?
It would be, that is not the reason why they did it. That was an additive, but that was not the reason behind it.
As being a unifying universal document that all states would abide by and present a basic set of principles and rights protected. How is that a wrong answer?
Because again, the whole point of the Constitution was to unify the separate states underneath one banner so that they
Okay, we're going in
looked
circles. We're
stronger
going in
to
circles.
outside entities
Right.
like
Okay,
France,
I didn't need to say
Great
that,
Britain.
but that's not relevant or necessary for me to answer in that way, because both answers can be correct.
Okay, so
This is
it's a
needlessly
partial
pedantic
answer.
at that point.
It's a
It is
partial
a
answer.
answer, and it is a fine and acceptable answer if I were to write that down on a
So
test.
everybody is covered underneath the Bill of Rights. We agree?
No, because at the
Okay.
time of its inception, they weren't. And the people who
In
dictated that ruled that
2023,
they weren't.
everybody's covered under the Bill of Rights, correct?
They are now because of amendments to it
Oh my God.
that now apply said rights towards African Americans, towards women, towards the disabled, to the original 10.
Okay, so again, in 2023, the Bill of Rights apply, do they not? They apply
Why
to
are we
people
going?
that-
They apply because
they
of
apply
amendments.
to people that aren't even citizens. Everybody that sets foot on American soil has constitutional rights covered underneath the Bill of Rights. You understand that, right? Do they have an amendment?
I don't know that we apply the
Do
law
illegal
Excuse me.
aliens
I don't know that
have
we
an
apply.
amendment?
No, we don't apply them equally towards people of undocumented origins.
We don't?
No, because
They don't get due
undocumented
process
immigrant-
under the law.
They really don't, and are
Okay.
often expedited without trial or without interpreters.
That's not true.
That is true.
That's not true.
They don't stand a fair trial.
They do. They get due process under
They
the law,
don't.
do they not?
They don't. Not
And
with
they're
not
all
with fair
required to get
representation.
interpreters. Oh my
Not
God.
with fair representation. No, they
Can we
aren't.
get back to the party switch?
Okay. You believe
All right.
Confederate statues should be taken down?
I don't believe anything in history should be taken down, because when you take things down in history, you're doomed to repeat it.
So taking down statues of Hitler in Germany means that Germany's going to rise towards a second Nazi party?
So again, if you talk to anybody that is of Jewish descent, they don't agree with anything being taken down because they want everybody to never forget that it happened. The same thing that we say from September 11th, never forget.
Are Jewish people asking, are Jewish people for the preservation of Nazi statues,
Do
though?
people worship monuments?
Yes, they do, actually.
No, they're not supposed to worship monuments.
They're not supposed to, but
nobody
they do.
goes and worships monuments. They are there as a sign of history to say this happened.
But are Jewish people asking that statues of Hitler be retained?
So do you want to burn Gettysburg down?
Why are you not answering questions? Are Jewish people asking that statues of Hitler be kept up for the preservation of their suffering?
Do you understand Jewish people want the concentration camps to stay open for people to tour on top of people's
concentration camp is not a concentration camp is not a statue. There's historic relevance.
So the German people,
Can I please finish? Thank you. There's historic relevance for places of suffering to still remain available for public viewing so people can understand the mechanisms, the process, the history, the suffering, and all of that. None of that comes with a statue of Hitler.
Okay, so again, the people of Germany dismantled the statues of him. Okay. Number one. Number two, anything that is historical, the Jewish people actually want to preserve. They actually made an entire museum to it. And all of the sponsored Jewish Holocaust museums, they're there for a reason. They want them there. They want to make sure that people
do you know why they're there? And you know what's not there? You know what's not there, Lynn? You know what's not there and is barred from being in those museums? The swastika flag. Nazi emblems, statues of Hitler aren't allowed to be there because they celebrate and glorify him. Right.
Okay, so
you can learn exactly those things in a museum than a statue, right? So we can take down statues, Lynn.
So are we going to take down the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial? Are we going to do all that?
Sure.
Why?
Why do we need them?
Why would you take them down?
Why do we need them?
We don't need any monuments, but why would you take them down?
Jefferson raped a shit ton of African-American women, and I don't think that's worthy of celebrating, regardless of his contributions towards the country.
You mean being one of the founding fathers of the country?
He can be a founding father. He still raped a shit ton of women.
Anybody, because as a matter of fact,
look, if you're sleeping with your slaves, that's SA.
He actually left his estates to his children who were illegitimate and not white, by the way.
You know how many black descendants directly from Jefferson there are?
Yeah, I know.
You know very well he has a documented history of having
18 children with his slaves. You're right. He had 18 children.
Okay,
with them.
right.
And
you know, if you fuck a prisoner in prison, that's still illegal because that's grape.
It wasn't grape. He didn't grape them.
It was because a slave is a prisoner.
Oh my God.
They weren't freed. They weren't citizens.
So in order to grape somebody, you have to have sexual intercourse with them against their will. He wasn't doing that. Are we changing?
You're saying that
what
slaves
grape is
consented?
Now? Are we changing it? Yes, they did.
Slaves cannot give consent. Lady, Lynn, slaves cannot give consent.
Oh my God.
In the same way that prisoners cannot give consent to sleep with guards.
Were they not humans? Were they not
adults? That is still
they weren't
prison
consenting
rape.
Adults?
Right?
They weren't consenting adults?
Isn't it still oh my God. Even if a prisoner, quote unquote, consents to sleep with a guard, that's still prison rape. Because prisoners cannot give consent.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Was it against the law for him to have sexual intercourse with
whether or not
any
it was
woman
against
that was
the law is antithetical. Whether or not it was against the law is antithetical to the point that it's unethical and immoral.
Well, you're bringing up a law that says.
No, I'm not. I didn't bring up any laws. And even if there was a law that made grape permissible, doesn't mean that it's okay to do.
Can we get back to the party switch?
You keep saying that, and then every point that I go on, you go down a horrific line
because you keep bringing up slavery, my guy. That's why. It doesn't have. Let's go to the party switch. The party switch was in.
I didn't bring up slavery. I brought up emblems
was in the
of
1960s.
the Confederacy.
We didn't have slavery in the 1960s. So can we move out of the 1800s,
you know
please, and get into at least the 1900s?
We did have Jim Crow, right? We did have Jim Crow in the 1960s, and that's worth mentioning. And if you look at the states that voted blue during Jim Crow era,
Jim Crow laws. I'm sure you vote Democratic,
right? Post Jim Crow era. And post it right. That goes into the point of the party switch.
Yeah, the party switch.
The exact same party that enforced Jim Crow era politics are also for the civil rights movement is indicative of the fact that there was a party switch.
So Lyndon Johnson, who was president, right? Lyndon Johnson, who then was a Triple K member in Congress, who passed the Civil Rights Act, right?
He was not a Triple K member.
Welfare reform, which absolutely crippled
the black community. He wasn't a Triple K member.
He was a Triple K member. It's in the JFK declassified.
No, they didn't cripple the black community.
It's in the JFK declassified files.
Interestingly enough,
welfare reform.
Black people saw their lowest level of Black people saw their lowest level of unemployment under the Johnson administration.
Prior to welfare reform and the Great Society, I agree with you. But then when welfare reform and the Great Society came about, then that shifted, didn't it? It was highly destructive to the black community. It was targeting it.
How did it make it worse if black unemployment was lowered to historic lows at that point?
Okay, it's because, again, in order for people to get on welfare, he changed the welfare system and he made it to where you cannot have a man in the home. It actually destroyed 1/3 of all marriages in the black community just in the first decade, right? And then that means that you only have a one-income household, right? So you're going to stay in poverty. The mother's going to go to work, right? Because you can't make it on just welfare alone.
Wrong. And white people are the highest beneficiaries, even since the 1960s, greater so in proportion to the population than black people are and have been. Wouldn't I just say that that was a destruction of the white population in America? Because a greater proportion of white people are on welfare and have been since the 60s than black people ever were. Anyways, we're at the 2-hour mark of whatever the fuck this is. More white people benefited from welfare policies of the 1960s than black people did and enlisted upon those services. Anyways, there's a Venmo Cash App in the bio.
What was the population of white people in the 1960s?
You know how per capita works, right?
Yeah, I understand how per capita works.
Right. So population doesn't really matter because we adjust for population size when we measure these things.
Okay.
Per capita, more white people were and are on welfare than black people are.
Okay, so
it takes into account population differences.
Okay, so back then when it first started, it was actually only for widows of World War I veterans, right? That's the whole reason why welfare was started. So sure, I will agree with you that there were more white people on welfare at that time. However, once the Great Society and welfare reform opened up, overwhelmingly it destroyed the black community.
How did it destroy them if they reached record lows of unemployment?
They did that prior to the welfare reform kicking in.
This was post, at the end of his presidency, saw the lowest level of black unemployment.
When was the end of his presidency?
You don't know when?
I know when the end of his presidency was. When was it?
Great. He left office in 1969.
1969, right. And when did welfare reform kick in the Great Society?
The mid-60s.
What year?
Let's see. '64.
Okay. It was actually 65 because it was January of 1965.
64 and 65.
Right. Okay. So it was actually enacted less than 6 months after the Civil Rights Act had passed. Civil Rights Act passed in June of 1964. Great Society and Welfare passed in January of 1965. So in less than 4 years, right?
Black unemployment was at its lowest level.
And then welfare reform kicked in, right? It's not going to happen overnight.
What the fuck? How did it not kick in then?
It's not going to happen overnight, just like
why would it take 4 years
don't happen overnight. However, if you actually research it, Jaden, you will see that they actually made specific caveats. You could not have the man in the home, right? Which now meant that there was no nuclear family. It broke it down to one income household, right? So that absolutely hit the Black community. Absolutely.
Where the fuck is that specified?
Everywhere. Research
Everywhere.
it.
Can you name a specific policy that says that one has to be widowed or single for that to apply?
Sure, hold on.
And also, why would it take 4 years for that to implement? Medicare isn't dependent upon that. Or Medicaid.
Okay, it's actually called the man in house rule.
And that's the only one?
It basically states in order to be eligible for welfare or government assistance, you cannot have a man residing with you. You cannot be married. It was all part of the Great Society and welfare reform.
Let's see here. It doesn't answer the question of low Black unemployment.
Okay, so
also, this was implemented in 68.
Yeah.
We're talking about 65 to 69. How did that destroy the Black community in a matter of what?
It was
How
implemented. It was
this?
signed into law in 1965. It was implemented in 1968. Lyndon Johnson stopped being president in 1969, and that's where you saw the downfall of the Black community. Once it was implemented.
What downfall are you referencing?
Single family homes, mothers on welfare. You saw all of that, Black unemployment, all that shit went sky high because of that one policy.
You know what also happened?
It even says
it was a drug war of the 1970s.
Like, I don't know how you don't know this.
I do know this, but your explanation and interpretation of that is woefully divorced from reality.
Wait a second. You said it didn't happen, and then you wanted me to tell you exactly where it happened.
No, I did not say it did not happen.
You didn't know it happened.
You're saying that Johnson destroyed... Shut up, stop. You're saying that Johnson destroyed the Black community.
I'm sorry. Did you just tell me to shut up?
I could say shut the fuck up, but I didn't. Anyways, you're saying that Johnson led to the destruction...
Is this what happens when you start losing a debate? You just get rude?
Have I not been rude before?
Well, so far you were actually asking me if I thought you were being polite and that things were going okay,
that was
right?
Like 2 hours
ago. Now all of a sudden you're telling me shut up, shut the fuck up.
Oh my God, get over it. Who the fuck cares? Get over it.
Okay, so I don't even know why you challenged me to a 1v1 debate because
I know you're fucking batshit.
You really
stupid.
can't hold your own. You had to call and phone a friend to help you out.
You had a friend.
You had to jump. Yeah, because you brought yours in, and he said, "Hey, I have a few minutes, and I'm in the queue." I said, "Fine, fuck it, whatever, bring him up." And now you're jumping all over the place. You're going to the Constitution. You're going to slavery.
Oh my God, I haven't jumped all over the place.
Like, get over yourself, bro.
Every time I brought up a point,
and go find other people to debate.
Oh my God, every time I brought up a point, you've gone down a rabbit hole of think. You laughed. Spiraled. And me saying shut up pales in comparison to the shit that they say about me when I go to their lives. I was told I shouldn't have kids. I was told the other day on Drew's Live that I should take fentanyl. People have asked how present my father's been in my life. A shit ton of people talk about my sexuality in really gratuitous ways. So me saying shut up is probably the nicest you'll get from me. Stop lying. Everything I'm saying is well documented. I can't play them, of course, here, but I screen record when people call me the N-word or send it to my messages. How did I move the goalpost? Enlighten me. All of her friends are still here. You're more than welcome to come in. By all means, take the baton.